Hi, I'm Lisa Gonzalez, Chief Business Officer here in Mt Diablo Unified. And in this week's episode of Ask the CBO, we're taking a look at what makes up the state of California's budget. Fortunately, we've got some really great resources out in the state of California that provide all this really rich data so that we don't have to run it. But in essence, this slide right here talks a little bit about the general fund budget, and it breaks it down by revenue source. So what you can really see here is that the state of California relies heavily on income tax. And since about the 1980s, more and more reliance has been on personal income tax. So you can see that in those orange sections. And although we would like to say that corporate taxes or even retail sales are a major part of our budget, these charts and this information shows information here to the contrary. How is the state's budget made up? I'll let you glance at this one for just a second. So in this budget, we're talking about general fund expenditures. And this is the governor's proposal, and this is what he is talking about for the next fiscal year, that for the state of California starts on July 1st. And the portion of the general fund that goes to K-12 education is there in the orange. That's K-12 and public community colleges. Each year it's determined by formulas that the voters approved. The voters approved in 1988 with Prop 98 to go back and actually change the state constitution to make sure that a specific amount of the budget is always allocated to K-12 schools and public community colleges. So really, to oversimplify, about 40% of the state's general fund goes to public education. But it all depends on a lot of things. It depends on the economy, it depends on how many kids are in school, and changes in the cost of living adjustment through the state also impact this. A little known fact, one that I love, but I'm not sure I will see come to fruition, at least in my lifetime, is the legislature could give more than the Prop 98 minimum. However, it's typically what they stick to. So this next slide here shows the general fund expenditures by agency. I'll move my picture over here a little bit, and you can see exactly what this looks like. This is what the governor's final budget numbers are from this current year and where we expect to see the changes. So right here, if you take a look at K-12 education, you see a 1.3% increase. Higher education, you see a 2.5% increase. So while those numbers do continue to go up, we know that we continue to monitor our budgets. And what's interesting is the overall increases here are approximately 1.5% across the board. Now let's dip into Prop 98 just a little bit. Again, this was determined in 1988 by the voters. The 2022-2023 governor's budget, this is looking really good. It's based on cautious state forecasts, but the Prop 98 funding will continue to reach higher amounts than ever before. We're expecting this next year approximately $15,261 per pupil. Of course, that doesn't all come straight to districts because it is distributed across a number of the components of K-12 as well as community colleges. But you know, the education budget is really calculated based on forecasting. And they do the same exact thing at the state that we do here in our district. We call it assumptions, they call it forecasting. When their forecast turns out too low, unexpected funds are added for the next year. This has happened for the last 3 years, so you can see that in the very top of the last 3 years in the orange bars. These funds were substantial in the past few years, and they've included programs like the addition of transitional kindergarten being added to the Prop 98 calculation. This is a really interesting slide, so I'll let you take a look at this one for just a second. So this takes a look at Prop 98 over time. And it takes a look at inflation. So another way to look at this is what money can buy. And over time, inflation has had historical numbers that may seem small, but right now what we're seeing is the cost of inflation and Prop 98 are becoming very, very close together. So when we're not adjusting for inflation over the last 30 years, actually, when we are adjusting for inflation, the core funding per student really hasn't changed a whole lot. This is the budget cycle. Always important to take a look at the budget cycle because this is how it works for the state. It's also how it works for school districts. We just finished our second interim. Sandwiched on each side of that second interim are the governor's budget message that came in January and the governor's May revisions, sometimes called the governor's May revise. That's coming up in May. Then what the state will do is it will adopt its budget in late June, early July. We, of course, adopt ours in June, which means that oftentimes there's a disconnect in that timing. And so the state may make some decisions that make us go back and actually adjust our budget. But anytime we adopt a budget, it's based on the best guess as to what we think many of those assumptions will be. For us, that includes things like enrollment, average daily attendance, staffing costs. So again, we just finished second interim. We are getting ready for the budget process. We're trying to finish that up as quickly as possible so that we can start vetting that with many of our departments, and that comes next. So with that said, that's it for this week. If you've got a question about anything related to district fiscal situations or questions about the state budget or anything else related to finance here in California, by all means, shoot me an email at cbo@mdusd.org, and I will be happy to respond to that. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.